I get that your story is about the OEC, but I think there's a element. I think a chunk of the story, frankly, is that we are making significant that after the entire debacle of Larry Householder, that the significant legislative changes that are happening to that if somebody wants to make to campaign finance for enforcement in Ohio is based on axes to grind, personal axes to grind that Brian Stewart's pissed about having to answer questions before him. And so this is not the way we should be doing this. And we should actually be having that discussion of what actually happened with Larry Householder and how do we make sure it doesn't happen again. So as it pertains to the Ohio Election Commission, I've been involved, and there have been eight adjudicated cases I've been involved with, and there's about 3 open cases. And I'm currently 7-1 before the Election Commission, which is not because I think the Election Commission is an ethical or responsible body, and I can describe why I think I've been so successful. But in particular, I got involved some with involving some local candidates, but after the Larry Householder experience, I got involved with what happened was Alan Freeman, a candidate from my area that was, I think, the only Householder candidate that lost in the primary. So he had saturation. I mean, saturation media on Cincinnati stations. And so that saturation, Cincinnati terrestrial stations, which if you're familiar with Cincinnati and if you're familiar with Claremont County, if you were to purchase, somebody running for office to purchase time on the Cincinnati terrestrial stations would be unbelievably expensive relative to the value because 80% of the people that would ever hear those ads are not going to be in the district that you're running in. I don't know if you're familiar with it. So it's very hard actually for Claremont County politicos to buy media time because the way like even the cable systems are, Claremont County is part of the Cincinnati market. And so or at least the part that was the Freeman district is. So it was so brazen, so ridiculous. He claimed the guy, he's one of the most unethical politicians I've ever seen. Okay. He claimed, and I don't want to belabor you, and you can stop me from talking, but I'm glad to talk about any of this. So he claimed his entire campaign finance reporting, he was a team householder candidate, said that he only spent $15,000 on his entire campaign. He had raised like $105,000. So he still had $90,000 on hand after the campaign was over. And he had this saturation media buying. And I went out, for example, and just looked at, I don't know if you're familiar with this, and most of the commissioners on the OEC would have no clue, okay, is that, all media buys are captured in an FCC database. So you can go out and look at them. So I looked out and I could find, within like minutes, I could find $140,000 worth of TV and radio purchasing for Freeman. So that caused me to file a case against him. In the course of that case, there was by the way, there's a whole other part of it that's not adjudicated yet that is about his print. Because as you know, there was, beyond the dark money mailers, there were a lot of mailers for the householder candidates, many of which were never actually paid for by the candidates, but they were put under the banner of their committee. Well, so that part's not even adjudicated with Freeman yet. So so I filed a case against him. He acted like he was clueless, and it's so absurd. And within that case, some invoices came to light that were for production and airtime, and they were all being billed to Constant Content, which, if you're well familiar with this, is one of the Jeff Longstress householder money funneling companies. And so Constant Content, some of these invoices had a bunch of other candidates on them. Those other candidates, I can't remember all of them, but there were only like 5 or 6. Well, I went and then looked at the other candidates to identify, did they report anything associated with Constant Content or with, anything that would be one of the other related householder companies like JPL and Associates or anything like that on their campaign finance. A few of them had. And so while I don't think they captured it correctly, I had no basis to say that they had not properly recorded their expenses, if you get what I'm saying. But several additional candidates, namely Brian Stewart and Gene Schmidt, did not have things reported on anywhere on their campaign finance. So then I brought cases against both of them. The Gene Schmidt's interesting to see how things progress. Okay. Alan Freeman, very similar fact sets with a variation for Schmidt. Alan Freeman had got a $50,000 fine, which he'll probably never pay, which I sent you the information, which people don't pay their fines. If you get a fine over $1,000, 98% of the time, it just doesn't get paid. Okay. So he gets $50,000 fine. Gene Schmidt, very similar fact set, but there's a difference. Gene Schmidt actually kept modifying her campaign finance reporting. And she's more of a, like constantly do something, and so she ends up having a violation and she gets a $50 fine. So 50,000 to 50. Okay. Then we have Brian Stewart, who participated in a radio ad where he recorded the voiceover. People testified to it, got invoiced for it, got invoiced as a dunning notice from a lawyer named, what's his name? David Goldstein. He gets dunning noticed on it twice for collections. Then he never tells his treasurers about any of this, but either of his treasurers, and just claims he never has to report this. And so he knows the radio ad ran. He did the voiceover for part of the radio ad, and the Ohio Election Commission let him off completely, but only after on February 12th, at testimony before the House committee, he told Richter he better buckle up and that he's going to eliminate the Ohio Election Commission. I put Brian Stewart is the level of ethics. I don't know how to separate Gene Schmidt, Alan Freeman, and Brian Stewart, but if you made a matrix that was, kind of a graph, and it was their level of authority and their lack of ethics, Brian Stewart is near the top of that list. I mean, these people, now let me just say this. What's so stunning is our leadership. Okay. And I don't know how familiar you are with the OEC yourself, but they strive to let people off. They strive to connect the people off. So, for example, had Brian Stewart in his original, he only got held over for a hearing by like one vote. Okay. Like it was almost that he was not going to ever even have a hearing on this back when it originally started. Had he simply come in, the same with Alan Freeman, and said, you know what, there's some mistakes on our finance report, we're going to fix it up. If they did just that, the Ohio Election Commission would let them off immediately. But they're so arrogant that they just insist I don't have to do anything. Brian Stewart, if you go listen to the excerpts that I sent you, he seems to be of the opinion, and this is the opinion of a lot of these insider types, that because there were two things involving the radio ad. There was another part which was mailers for him. Okay, but the radio part, he had there were two charges. One was for the production of the radio ad, which was like $1,000, and then part of it, then there was like $9,000 that was the airing of the radio ad. So he doesn't think he even needs to show or report the production of the radio ad, because these people think that it's okay that insider political types on the northbound train, they not only do they not have to report a lot of stuff, but they get a lot of stuff made for them where people are being compensated to make them. And then they have this belief that's totally antithetical to the law that they don't have to report that unless they actually use the ad. Now, in Brian Stewart's case, it's like, well, but the ad did run. Like, it did run, So, like, I'm sorry. No, 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 no. So this has everything that I've been involved with has nothing to do with the dark money side of it that would go into C4. What people don't understand is that Larry Householder, apart from the growth and opportunity stuff, was directly paying for things that went out under the banner of, Stewart, Friends of Brian Stewart, or Friends of Alan Freeman. And that money, what was happening was the money from First Energy, and you can go read the federal case, okay, the money from First Energy was getting transferred into Constant Content and JPL and Associates. Those were the two basically money laundering companies. And so Constant Content would go do these ads. Okay, so for Alan Freeman, they did $280,000 worth of work. That was the bills for that work were all paid. So Alan Freeman never paid anything. The money was money that was just getting transferred into Constant Content that was First Energy money. It paid the bills. Okay, so Freeman's a great example. He was in all the ads. These were video ads. Stewart was a radio ad. Okay, so they go. So that money was just, frankly, directly the bribe money from First Energy. It just got transferred. Millions of dollars got transferred into Constant Content. So people ask, well, how did the bills get paid? As the candidate never paid them. Well, that's because Constant Content was getting millions of dollars transferred into it from First Energy money, and then they would use that to pay the bills. Correct. And here's the problem with it. Here's the reason why there's a massive cover up around it, as far as I'm concerned, including the OEC, is because you either need to show the expense. By the way, Gene Schmidt showed the expense. So Gene Schmidt actually paid bills to Constant Content. Okay. And then you either need to show the expense or you would need to show an in-kind contribution. And so remember, these are not, just to give you it's called the name will come to me, but there's a name for a type of expense. Let's say you were running for office and I just went out and made ads for you and ran them on my own, and you had nothing to do with it and no knowledge of it whatsoever. There's a name for that. It'll come to me and then you don't have to report anything, right? And I could do that personally or under whatever umbrella. Okay, but these people directly participated, right? They were in the ads. Brian Stewart read the disclaimers. Alan Freeman was walking around his beautiful face on the TV ads, and so they were directly involved. So it wasn't whatever that name is. It might come to me of a the kind of expense where you had no knowledge of it whatsoever. These guys had direct knowledge of it. Alan Freeman, they were all approving it. So Brian Stewart, where did I get the Brian Stewart radio ad from? Brian Stewart. He gave it to me in Discovery. So how can he say he didn't know anything about a radio ad where he read the disclaimer? Back to your in-kind point. Well, if it was that, you would never produce in B-roll a disclaimer that said paid for by Friends of Brian Stewart. So the key is he's reading the disclaimer of who's paying for it. So what happens since you're familiar with B-roll and by the way, if your campaign had B-roll stuff made and then put on some website where theoretically you have no connection, which is all a ruse, but that's how growth and opportunity. Yeah. Well, I'm sure. So they do this thing where they put out the B-roll, right? Like they put out the B-roll, and that's where growth and opportunity attack and stuff like that get their imagery and stuff from. The cost of creating the B-roll, okay, is a reportable expense, right? So that's kind of like the Brian Stewart. Like if I make the B-roll, but it's logical. Yeah, I don't know that I wouldn't think it's illegal per se, or even necessary unethical, that if I was running for some office and I want to pay to have somebody create a bunch of stuff and then just put it out there, say, hey, if you want to use this for making things in support of my campaign, feel free to use any of this stuff. I don't think that's wrong. My personal opinion, I really wouldn't have a beef with that. It's logical to make that available to people, but I would never have made something that said paid for by, Chris Hicks, friends of Chris Hicks or something as part of that. And I wouldn't be involved. So like Freeman is a better example than Stewart, because Stewart did not produce a lot of documents, but Freeman, he approved everything. And he produced the emails showing that he approved it. But to your point, let's get back to your in-kind point, because you hit a great point there. The reason why there's a quote unquote, in my view, cover up around this is because if they showed it as an in-kind, it would be from a corporation, Constant Content, which is illegal. The point is, all the bills and all the work was done by a corporation, Constant Content. Okay, strategic media placement did all the ads. So Scott Schweitzer, he testified repeatedly on getting approvals from the candidates for these things. Repeatedly testified to this. Okay, so, and how careful they were to make sure they always had approval before doing anything, which I think is, I think all these places that do this stuff are slippery. But in being slippery, you know how to cover your bases, if you know what I'm saying. Like, I'm never going to do something without having the right approvals. So, yeah, so the reason why, so if Brian Stewart, because think about this. So why wouldn't you just, if you're Brian Stewart and there's $1,000 of production, $9,000 of radio ad, multiple people testified that it was approved by your campaign, blah, blah, blah. Why wouldn't you just update your finance report to show an in-kind for that amount? Well, because if you do that because it was a corporation, you're in trouble. If you do it from Alan Freeman, and even if you figured out a way to show it as I think Stewart would be over this line also, but if you did it as said, well, I'll figure out a different way to report it. Like, I'll say that JPL and Associates did it, which was a LLC, which is treated differently than a corporation. Even if you did that, it's over the limit. So $280,000 is over the limit. So the reason why these people, Alan Freeman has never updated his campaign finance reports because they can't, because it reveals an actual crime you can go to jail for. But all of this, that's a lot of background, and the thing on the table right now is this, let me just comment on the OEC, and then you probably want to get to the dissolving the OEC stuff. But the OEC is a complete joke, okay? A complete rigged joke. And the only reason I have been successful getting stuff, adjudicated before me is I am unbelievably ruthless, and I'm not a lawyer. So I don't, historically, the OEC is kind of a lemming panel of people. There's a couple lawyers that control what happens, and one of them is Don Bray. The other one is, I think is it Don McTeague. He's like the Democrat one. The funny part is I'm a super right-wing guy, but I've only ever had cases against Republicans because I'm our own house, let's fix our own house type of guy. And then lately Ron O'Brien has been one of those lawyers if you're familiar with Ron O'Brien, he is. Okay, but I don't think that'll last long, because I think he's getting to a point where legit you're at the point, dude, you got to retire, because he's able-minded and you're kind of done. But Don Bray, and they never thought, Don Bray with Alan Freeman never would have thought that I would have. What they do is they wear you down, because I'm in Cincinnati. I probably had to drive to Columbus 12 times for motion hearings, this around Freeman alone, and it's a wear you down thing. So any citizen that tries to bring a complaint, and the boards of elections, they only bring things that are like, somebody didn't file their report on time. They bring like, what minutia type cases, not, they're never going to bring a Larry, like the Perry County Board of Elections is never going to bring a case against Larry Householder. So it's just not going to happen. So I'm just basically brutal, and I back them into a corner so hard, and they hate me. They absolutely hate me, and they'll yell at me. They'll get into arguments with me, and the commissioners will. And frankly, the body itself has gone downhill. The case that I had against Freeman at the time, what's his face, Kreitz was the head of it. The people who were on the commission were much higher caliber people. There were probably 4 lawyers on the commission at that time when Freeman was there. And if you look at how the actual people on the commission has evolved, they're the worst now than they've ever been. and they are, basically lemmings, and they protect their own. And and one of the things I had in my email to you, not to go, it ties back, but just as an aside, if you go look, because I've become very familiar with this, the Larry Householder next level down, you had that kind of inner circle, like the guy that killed himself, and what's his face that was the head of the ORP. You get that kind of inner circle. The next level down of lieutenants, none of them were held accountable for anything. And frankly, all but Anna Lippincott got promoted. Every one of them except Anna Lippincott got promoted. And I don't know what Anna Lippincott's deal was. I don't know if you know these names. Maybe you may know these names, but there were okay. So the next level down, there were a set of lieutenants that ran the householder operation. Those key people were a woman named Anna Lippincott, a guy named Stephen Caraway, and a woman named Megan Fitzmartin. Okay, there was a fourth guy named Tommy Rolfe. Okay, so those four people: Anna Lippincott, Steve Caraway, Megan Fitzmartin, and Tommy Rolfe. They were the lieutenants that ran the day-to-day operation. And none of them were held accountable for anything. Anna Lippincott left the country, honest to God. So she was never available. The OEC has no ability to get people to testify that are not in the state of Ohio. Okay. By the way, all of Larry Householder's print work got done in Pennsylvania, right across the border, by a company called a Mighty Group. A Mighty Group that did all the printing. So you can never get done. All those mailers and stuff were done by a place literally right across the border out of Ohio. They know what they were doing. Okay. So Anna Lippincott goes to the Netherlands. Okay. Now, supposedly she's back and she's working for, what's the guy, the Indian guy that was a senator, and then he's running for some office, but she's supposedly working on somebody's campaign. And so any event, Megan Fitzmartin became a policy person for Stevens. Tommy Rolfe got hired by Stevens. Steve Caraway got put on the election commission. So Stephen Caraway, one of the top guys running the Larry Householder crooked operation, is now on the election commission. And what optical world would it make sense that Stephen Caraway, the guy that was in the, you can go, was referred to in all of these cases and in the federal case? It's like unbelievable. In Ohio, how little accountability there is. There's not even any shame. Like, oh, we probably shouldn't put him on the election commission since he was one of the lieutenants in the crooked operation. So that's it. So you have this. So part of the reason I mentioned that at that point in our conversation, or my diatribe, is that Caraway, that's an example of how bad the election commission has become. You have these complete political hacks now on the election commission. Okay. And so now let's move forward to, and I apologize, my diatribe here, it is a diatribe, but so now you have, and I just sent you this morning a link that has the entire testimony from, you can go look at it, Ohio channel, but before the House Finance Committee, where, he's basically threatening Richter. So Stewart's got an active case. He's threatening Richter that I'm going to dissolve the Ohio Election Commission while he has an active case, and refers again and again to his active case. It's just the ethics of it are unbelievable. And so go ahead. I'm sorry. Correct. Correct. Well, I think they largely, well, two things. Going to get this first off. Other than, I don't know of any, but other than my cases, I don't believe that they've heard a single Larry Householder related case. Okay, which says that's one thing. Okay, now the case I referenced and what I sent to you, they don't really do like cases that involve hearings, like what I've done with them. That kind of really messes them up because they typically come in for their meetings. Everything's pre-baked in the back room. They're in and out, and there's hardly ever any hearings. So once they have a hearing, it becomes a mess because they only meet once a month. So, if it was a court or pretty much any even a quasi-judicial adjudicatory body, they would say, we're having the hearing Tuesday through Thursday or something like that and get it over with. But because they only meet once a month and they're totally ill-equipped to have hearings, and the commissioners generally want to come there at 10 and leave at 1, they can't do more than one hearing at a time. And so everything gets bottled up. That's why these cases take years. It's not because of me. It's because they can't. And then anybody who says they can't, it's so funny because if I said I can't make a hearing, they tell me to go F yourself. But if Brian Stewart says he can't make a hearing, that's no problem. We'll work around your schedule, And so, but any of that, so they have this thing. And the case that I mentioned, the only other, because I've gone to a lot of these meetings and you have to sit there waiting for your thing to start. And I was sitting there when Joe Blystone's case was going on. And that to me would be an example. I don't know. I mean, I know him, but I don't know Joe Blystone. He's not like a friend of me. I wasn't ever a supporter of his. But he absolutely had screwed up campaign finance reporting. Okay, absolutely. His finance reporting was screwed up. However, he got made an example of because he was, an outsider challenging the status quo. So he ends up, and I think he feels like I contacted him recently because I'm like, okay, so you ended up paying, hey, Joe, did you know that you ended up paying like $138,000 when most of these other people never pay their fines at all? It's like, so there's almost never a high profile case, and certainly no high profile cases that are ever brought by who you would think should be bringing them, the Secretary of State, the boards of elections, anything like that. Okay. And the high profile cases are usually brought by people like either me, very few are people like me, I might be the only one like me that's a pro se type person. You get these the establishment lawyers, get somebody's, funded these lawyers to go after Joe Blyson or something, or the Secretary of State's going after him. Yeah, but I think if you look at the determinations that they make, it's super protective of insiders. And I think it doesn't matter whether they're Democrats or Republicans. I think as a former, I used to be friends with a rep named Tom Brinkman from Cincinnati area. And he used to tell me, there's an unwritten rule that you don't, he would tell me things like, unless it's pedophilia, they're going to protect each other, whether they're Democrats or Republicans, because it's an unwritten rule to protect each other unless it's something so bad we can't protect you, because the shoe could be on the other foot next time. You get what I'm saying? So I think it gets used. What's so funny when I hear it, when I go there and have to sit there waiting, is you get these regular people, just, Sally Smith, who was running for school board. Okay. And they didn't file a report. They filed a report 3 days late, and they're having a preliminary review before and they're like all scared, and then you have Alan Freeman, $280,000 that can just lie with impunity and make these ridiculous examples of how he didn't know, what was going on. And so it's so, frankly, if I were redesigning the whole thing, the thing that's in Columbus should be the high profile cases. All these little rinky dink cases about didn't file your report, on time. Those are the things that they should never even need to, that could be handled locally, if you follow what I'm saying. Versus that. Well, yeah, it's a catch-22. You that is exactly the way I think. Okay. And when I look at this, everything about what's going on with the OEC right now, I have no love for the OEC at all, as you can tell. And everything about what's happening right now is demonstrative of how effed up things in Ohio are. So so you and I both know, it sounds like you would know, a huge amount of crap gets dumped into the budget bill that is dumped into there to evade having any sort of public hearings on what's getting dumped in there. And so the notion, the idiotic notion, beyond everything else you think about Brian Stewart and the home team, is so you're going to make this radical change to how campaign finance integrity works in Ohio without it being a standalone bill, without any hearings, without any involvement of the boards of elections. Okay, you're just going to go do this. Just do it, and we'll figure out what happens on the other side. Frankly, I think doing it. The funny part is if it stays in there, it's it's probably better than the OEC because it's going to create absolute chaos. Because if you want to, I don't know how familiar you are with boards of elections, but to the degree, and I have not read the legislation, I've read the LSC summary of it only, but to the degree that this gets routed to whatever gets routed to boards of elections. So boards of elections are politically hack operations. The central committees in each county each appoint two members, two Democrats, two Republicans. And so those people are highly connected with the political system in those counties. And by the way, the OEC, like Stephen Caraway always recuses himself on any case involving House Elder things, which is kind of funny. Your new member has to recuse himself on any case I'm involved with because he was part of the team. So now, okay, are they going to recuse at the local level? Because then you're not going to have anybody be able to hear the cases because these people are heavily involved. And by the way, you probably know this, but in case you don't, there's 4 members on a local board of election. So when they vote, the tie-breaking vote, if there's ever a tie, is the Secretary of State. So now the Secretary of State, assuming that the Democrats stick with the Democrat and the Republicans stick with the Republican, now the Secretary of State's office is going to be involved in being the tie-breaking vote on all kind of violations to campaign finance laws. It's the whole thing, and to the degree anything goes to the Secretary of State, the politicization of it is going to be huge. Now, and to make an example, LaRose, I have no idea what happened to him, but there was some showboat and stuff where LaRose supposedly had some complaints against Householder that got referred to the OEC. And I don't even have any idea what happened to those. It was just like a press release thing, and that he was taking action. Well, what's going to happen now if there's no OEC and he has some direct role in the adjudication of these things? Okay, it's going to put a lot more political heat on all this stuff, which could be good because now it's going to be, why isn't Secretary LaRose himself doing this? And the way it is now, he can have plausible denial. I referred it to the OEC. I don't know what happened to it then. But now if they have a direct role, how are they going to weasel out of it at that point? I think that cop on the correct. Go ahead. I'm sorry. So, and I haven't. I'm here. Can you hear me? Okay, so you were breaking up there for vacation about my land. So you obviously have read it, and I haven't. Or read enough, gotten more familiar with it than I have. So does it have anything in there about how it's like? Is there going to be Is there a quasi judicial function like they would have here, or are they just going to make the decisions in the back room? So I'm telling you, that guy, the guy who is Katz, Brian Katz. Okay, that's somebody you should call. Okay, if you don't know who that is, okay, do you know who Brian Katz is? So he's supposedly LaRosa's director of election integrity or something. Okay, he's one of the most crooked pieces of s you've ever seen. Okay, so so for example, Jean Schmidt, one of her defenses in her case was that she had called up Brian Katz, and Brian Katz gave her advice. You can take to the bank stuff I tell you. I don't exaggerate stuff, but you can check it all out, or I can check. So that was part of her defense, was that she had called Brian Katz on a weekend, okay, on a Saturday, or she or her husband. Her husband was the treasurer for her campaign, and Brian Katz told her what she that was the way to report it. Da, da, da. Well, then I tried to do Brian Katz. Okay, you would think in a hearing this would be relevant. Supposedly Brian Katz said that it was okay not to report any of this crap. Okay, and he did so on a Saturday. Okay, now I don't know if you're familiar with how the Secretary of State's office works, but if I called the Secretary of State's office and asked them, hey, how should I report this? They're going to tell me, we can't tell you anything. We don't give legal advice. That's their normal answer, right? And I don't know that that should be the answer, but that's what they say, okay, every time. But not for Jean Schmidt. For Jean Schmidt, the director of election integrity is available on the weekend to do a consultation with her and her husband. That's what I'm talking about, the rigged, basically crooked process. Then the Ohio Election Commission blocked me from being able to call him as a witness. Now, you would think that would be very relevant. She's making, I don't know how much you have a legal mind, but she's making statements that her basis of her actions was because Brian Katz told her A, B, and C on a phone call. Okay, now I'm saying, okay, her saying that is hearsay. So I want to call Brian Katz to see if he says the same thing, that he told her this was okay to report it this way. And then Richter and the team do everything in their power to keep me. Brian Katz, I've never seen him testify ever, because they from being able to testify, and he is a political operative, and not and so I don't know how this would all work. I'm familiar with organizations like, you might be familiar with, say, the Board of Tax Appeals. Okay, so the Board of Tax Appeals, they adjudicate property tax things at the percent the appeal level from your local board of whatever it's called that does the property taxes, Board of Revision. But they have hearing officers, the hearing officers, little courtrooms that they hear the hearings in. So they have a process that is to adjudicate those things, and that's the way most of these administrative bodies, operate. This seems so half, and if you're reading it and you're saying, I can't figure this out, it just screams. Anybody in their right mind would say that to make such changes to we're real on, not slam it into the budget bill. And then if you need me to call you on the other line, if it's breaking, but anybody that's looking at, I don't know the context, but what I was saying basically in my diatribe there was that anybody that had half a brain, 10% of a brain, would think that if we're going to make significant reforms in Ohio to how campaign finance laws are enforced, it requires thought. It would require standalone legislation. There are a million moving pieces that need to be considered. Probably Ohio Administrative Code on just how the Ohio Election Commission operates. What's going to happen? Is there going to be Ohio Administrative Code on what the Secretary of State's going to do? Where's this all going to go? And I think that the way that the OEC, if you look at their administrative code, it's a complete joke. Okay. And this is only going to make it worse because it's going to, who knows what to do and what kind of control is this going to be? I can't believe, I don't understand. If you go watch the hearing of the finance committee, I don't understand why the Democrats, I don't even understand Democrats in Ohio. Like, why aren't they screaming about this? Why aren't they screaming about you're a Larry Householder crook candidate, and now you're wanting to get rid of what little of, in their world, what little enforcement there is of anything. You're wanting to gut it. So it's just very bizarre to me how things work. If you watch that hearing, very telling. I don't have you watched. It's like, I don't know, like 20 minutes or 30 minutes. The hearing that where Richter that is testifying before. Okay, so what's the only concern that politicians tend to raise? They want the false claim law restored in some way. There used to be a law that if you made false statements about another candidate, you could be fined and brought before the commission. And Gene Schmidt was one of those. Okay. And that overturned by the federal court. Okay. It never changed it on the books. It's still on the. And well, about in there, if you just get more establishment politicians because they're in the House, their biggest thing is they want that false claims thing back because they want to be able to use it against their political opponents. For bad speech is more speech, not making laws against speech. For all the lies and sneers and bullshit that happens politically, I think it'd be even worse if the government was trying to enforce what's the truth, in that process. But I don't understand why these politicians even sit by without screaming. I don't understand why. Think about this. I don't believe even any Democrat ever introduced any bill to reform campaign finance reporting or enforcement in Ohio after Larry Householder. In what world does it make any sense that the Democrats want to do that? Right? It would seem like it would be a bully pulpit issue. I'll tell you why, and I had this in my note, and I don't mean to just keep rambling on and on, but the reason why is because what Larry also did is normal practice on both sides. It is normal practice for both Democrats and Republicans. What happened with Larry, this idea that there's a bunch of money that gets the candidates that never gets reported anywhere, literally anywhere. So that they both do it. What happened with Larry Householder, he did it with so much money. Okay. Normally it might be 10, 15 million an election, not 61 million. And so that got the attention of the people. So none of these people, Democrats or Republicans, want there to be serious enforcement of any of this stuff. I don't think. And they could say, like, oh yeah, we do. It's like, okay, well then why didn't either side ever put forward legislation to reform campaign finance or campaign finance enforcement in Ohio since Larry Householder? And there's Democrat and Republicans saying we want to outlaw the basics, like the basics of, don't we think that shit should need to be reported on your reports? and you don't report stuff that should be reported. There's basic laws. And so if you want to uncork the fortune cookie as to why this never happens, it's because both sides like the system the way it is. Well, I think that yeah. As it relates to the idea of a Columbus-based adjudicatory body, or centrally based adjudicatory body, the answer is allow people to do it remotely. So the law in Ohio, and they can already do this, by the way, they just do it because they're just basically dicks, the people that, so they're starting to open up a little bit now, but the law in Ohio, so, well, during COVID, they did it all remotely, right? Like, so it was all, the COVID, exceptions, is that the commissioners need to be physically present. There's nothing in the law that says witnesses need to be physically present, that parties need to be physically present. So, and they would go on and on about how, in 54 cases and stuff, how well it worked under COVID, because now all these people could just come in on Zoom. Somebody who has like a small violation, like $100 fine type thing, or $50, they might have their whole thing might be 5 minutes. Their whole preliminary review would be 5 minutes. And so they would drive to Columbus and back. So they did that all over Zoom. So the point is, the barrier of having to drive back and forth, that's them. I tried to have a witness remotely because I've been told, and I got told you can't. It's like, so it's a witness where you're going to talk and they're going to talk for 3 minutes. That's the entirety of their testimony. So they're going to spend all day. They just don't they just, right? It's kind of funny. It's like it's like Dan Bungie, I didn't listen to Dan Bungie all the time, but one time he said, like, politicians, they love you, they want to kiss your baby, they want to shake your hand, but secretly they hate you. And for people, why would you be so viscerally negative towards me? You would think you'd want citizens that are willing to do the real legwork, because my 7-9 record is not the real legwork. I'm not some hack, trying to go after somebody just to settle an axe to grind or something. I truly have a passionate belief that this should be done correctly. I just can't, and I can't believe these politicians that just sit up there and lie and act dumb, around all this. So you could have a central adjudicatory authority and let people participate remotely, and as far as, so could boards of elections. I mean, the question to ask ourselves is, why aren't boards of elections meetings, if election integrity, why aren't all of them online? There are some counties, like Summit County's online, Claremont County's not, and why aren't these things, every board of revision hearing has to be recorded by law. Why aren't board of elections recorded? They want to make it appear that it's like the ethics commission, which is it's equal joke. It's just to create window dressing that there's some sort of enforcement. One thing I want to just make on a quick tangent, but I want to mention one thing. I don't know if I had this in my note, but to tell you how rigged it is. I don't know if you know this, but every time they have a election commission meeting, there's 2 agendas. There's one that gets given to the public and is on the podium. There's a separate version of the agenda for the commissioners that tells them how to vote. Just settle that. Richter puts together an agenda for them that tells them how he thinks they should vote on each thing. Okay. If you go up, I only found out about this even because they accidentally left one on my desk when I was like having a case. I'm like, they accidentally put one on where I was sitting. And then I'm looking at it like, this tells them how to vote. And so then I'm like, this is ridiculous that you have these 2 agendas. Why don't you if you're going to have an agenda telling people how to vote, why isn't that the agenda you give to people that come to the meeting so they can see how this is actually working? And it's like, oh no, we're not trying to hide anything. So since then, they largely, when I get there, they will give me a copy of it because they know that I'm going to bitch and moan about it. But that's how lemming this thing is, that 90% of what they do is just they vote the way they're told by Phil Ricker. So there you have the guy who is effectively, it would be like the clerk of courts, which is what he is. The clerk of courts tells the judge how they're supposed to rule on everything. But all that being said, I wish it would go, if you're saying hardly any of it actually goes to the boards of elections, that's not as good because the Secretary of State will put up more walls around the whole process of whatever they're doing than a local board of elections would do. But it'll be interesting if you look at it more. I look at it more. Where would you have the candidates that file locally, or I think now they can file on the online thing, but local candidates like commissioners, auditor, local judges, stuff like that. Where do their cases go? And I don't know the answer to that. Well, remember you have like the county elected officials. You're going to have township school district, school board. If there's municipal like villages or cities, they would have things. And then you have like your 10, there's like 10, typically 10 county positions. Like, and I know they're trying to take away coroner as elected office, but you get one. But I think there's 10 not counting coroner, like county engineer, this in there. The whole like, not having looked at it, the text, it's just obvious. I just can't believe it wouldn't be something where any competent legislator would feel like whatever we're going to do here needs to be part of a standalone process and bill. Okay. Well, and I don't know, correct. On a bigger scheme, the abuse of the budget bill is, you know, forever, and the stuff that gets put in the budget bill, like this, like a massive reform, okay, that stuff is put in there because it would not, I believe 80 plus percent of the time, it is, well, let me rephrase it. There is some of that stuff that has gone through hearings and so forth that was standalone bills, and then they jack it into the budget bill to get it done. So, and you could arguably say, well, there was some discernment, but there is a lot of stuff that is thrown into these budget bills that has never gone through any inspection. And this would be a great example. I'm not aware of any standalone bill that then got rolled in or anything. And all of these politicians, this is why I think so lowly of Brian Stewart. Brian Stewart was a team householder candidate, period. Okay. He tries to wash his hands of it by saying, well, I was the guy who made the motion to expel householder from the house. Okay. But now he's also the guy trying to, in a manner that completely lacks thought and discernment, gut the existing campaign, the theoretically existing campaign finance enforcement mechanism. What does it tell you? Like, if Brian Stewart gave a rat's ass about stopping Larry Householder type activities and behavior, he would have done so. He's had several years to do that. He's known his own involvement, and so it's just so, I just have such a low opinion of him because he still plays this dumb thing. You can go watch his excerpts. Could I have heard a radio ad that appeared in such and such county? And it's like, I don't know. I don't know why the hell that matters. Like, it ran, you know, but how dumb do these political types think people are? I think maybe there are a lot of dumb people so they can get away with this, but it's like, come on. You've had all these people testify that this radio ad was created and that it ran, and that now you deny it, but that you gave approval of it. Okay. Then you're going to sit here and say you shouldn't redo your campaign finance reports. And by the way, if you watch his excerpts, along the way, you never told either of your treasurers, ever told them about getting dunning notices, trying to collect a debt on this. Never bothered to talk to either of your treasurers about it. You go watch, and his current treasurer, Cardelloni, she's like, I found out about this in the meeting, in the hearing. I found out about this from, there were things in the second set there was a set of documents or some she found out from my complaint, but it's like the first time she'd ever seen the document was in the hearing. It's like, so why would whoever heard of a candidate that doesn't even inform his treasurer of things that are collection attempts on bills? Makes no sense. It basically says you knew it was crooked. So you're not going to tell so I know I've gone far afield in this discussion, but I think I would love that that this becomes a rally cry to that we never did anything after Larry Householder's. Not only did we never repeal House Bill 6, the purchase legislation, we never did anything about campaign finance. And we aren't even ashamed that we in Ohio, if you look at Ohio, nothing involving campaign finance of any magnitude that's real issues, real institutional issues. Like Joe Blyson was not an institutional issue. Okay. It wasn't one of the political parties and, Larry Householder and a caucus and all this kind of stuff. It was just Joe Blyson. But we have never done anything, to address these issues. And we're not even ashamed that the only time there's ever any action in Ohio on anything like this is because the feds get involved. Where was Dave Yost? By the way, where was Dave Yost? He was still covering up ECOT. Remember ECOT? Are you familiar with ECOT? Okay, so ECOT was, the online, by the way, the online high school, okay? By the way, had it worked and not been a scam, wouldn't it have been exceptionally useful during COVID? You know why? Because it would have theoretically existed during COVID. Well, what's his face? Just buried that one because he was the guy who was the crook involved with it, was one of his top contributors. By the way, what I put it here just as a side, in case of stuff, put it in your file of facts, is Winterset CPAs was the CPA firm for all of the householder candidates who did not have established treasurers and so forth. So like Alan Freeman, now neither Schmidt or Stewart were Winterset CPAs, but Alan Freeman was, because all of the householder candidates. Who is Winterset CPAs also the CPA firm for? Dave Yost and Huffman. So it's all this incestuous. By the way, I have a case that involves one of their personnel that for filing fraudulent reports. It is this just very incestuous. Nobody really wants. Well, that's what pains me the most, because I am like a super right-wing conservative guy, and I believe that in the rule of law, and that we should ethically want to have proper reporting. I actually think it should be an issue that favors conservatives and Republicans, that we stand against, this flim-flam stuff. But I tell you, both sides, they like the way it is. So it'll be very interesting. Somebody told me, I asked a friend of mine what they thought would happen with this in the Senate. And because Huffman is, in the House, and then you have whoever's the head of the Senate now McCauley is buds with Huffman. So the person told me, well, they thought it would probably stay in there because those two are aligned. And if Huffman didn't want it to be in there, he wouldn't have had it in there coming out of the House. So. But a veto. But you should ask. I highlighted in that note to you because I think it could be another whole story is how they never collect their fines. They don't even have a system that can keep track of it correctly. I mean, I had to build that spreadsheet that I sent you. I had to build it from multiple spreadsheets, and I can only even analyze where there was actually a payment made. And like, what did I say? And they're like 70% of all fines over. It's actually over $300 something, but I put 1,000 in. I think what I sent you. It's like 60, 70%. Nobody even ever pays them at all. So there's no payment. So what I had in that spreadsheet is of the ones where there were payments, where there actually was a payment, the ones over 1,000, they paid an average of like 1.8% of the fine. They don't have, what happens is they don't have a way to track, because a lot of their fines is like, $100 fine plus $50 a day. And the election commission has no way to track it. So if you hit a violation, you send in like, I'll send in $150. Okay. But based on the number of days, it should be $12,000. They don't have any way to track how much you owe. And so they basically just accept it. It's absurd. Okay. Um, let me think here. There was something that when I was going on rambling about the uh, not paying the fines. The Whether it's going to get watered down. I'm just trying to. There was something in my mind that popped out, and I'm trying to see if I can find it again. Um, I know what I was going to say. I would call. I don't know if you've talked to him, but I sent you his mobile number because I have it from talking to him in this case. I would just go, yeah, I would go ask Stewart. But you got it. He's so slippery. You got to say, I just want you to give me yes or no answers. Yeah. Did you participate in the production of a radio ad? Yes or no? Okay. Did the radio ad run? Yes or no? Okay. Did you ever report any cost of that radio ad on your campaign finance report as an expense or an in kind? Yes or no? Just give me a yes or no answer to those questions. Gene Schmidt doesn't anymore. Gene Schmidt's case is done. Brian Stewart's case is theoretically done, but they concluded the case while it was still on appeal, which makes no sense. But yeah, they don't have pending cases right now per se. It would be in the appeal process at this point for him. For her, there's nothing. She's done. And I get that your story is about the OEC, but I think there's a element. I think a chunk of the story, frankly, is that we are making that after the entire debacle of Larry Householder, that the significant legislative changes that are happening that if somebody wants to make to campaign finance for enforcement in Ohio is based on axes to grind, personal axes to grind that Brian Stewart's pissed about having to answer questions before him. And so this is not the way we should be doing this. And we should actually be having that discussion of what actually happened with Larry Householder and how do we make sure it doesn't happen again.